I'll get one. Okay. Good evening, everyone. 7 p.m. I'd like to call our February 8, 2021 City Council meeting to order. And because of COVID-19 restrictions, our meeting tonight is being held virtually via Zoom. Public comments for this meeting were accepted in advance by mail and email. These comments will be read into public record shortly. If you'd like to submit a public comment for our next meeting, please visit our website at www.merriam.org and follow the directions listed there. As a reminder to the City Council, please be conscientious of others trying to speak slowly and clearly, and state your name prior to speaking. If I need to confirm something that may have been difficult to hear, I will ask for clarification. The format for tonight's City Council consideration on items will be staff presentation, then I will open up a time for council questions. Please hold questions until the end of the staff presentation. If you have a question when I ask for them, please physically raise your hand so I can see it on your video. Now we'd like to go ahead and get ready for the Pledge of Allegiance. Once we get that going, please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United
States of America
and to the
republic
for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty
and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Julie, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Sism,
Here.
Councilmember DeVold,
Here.
Councilmember Hans,
Here.
Councilmember Caldwell,
Here.
Councilmember Knapp,
Here.
Councilmember Neal,
Here, audio only.
Councilmember Pape,
Here.
Councilmember Silvers,
Here.
Councilmember Yodridge.
Here.
Very good. We're going to move into public comments. Julie, would you please read any public comments that were submitted in advance into the record?
Yes. Our first public comment is from Michael Kelly. He's the policy director for Bike Walk KC. This is Dear Mayor Sism and members of the council. On behalf of Bike Walk KC, I wanted to submit testimony to express our organization's strong opposition to the proposed panhandling ordinance. While there are several issues with this piece of legislation, I will limit my focus to the pedestrian safety portion. In the information form submitted by Chief McLaughlin for this ordinance, he notes that in Merriam, over 50% of all crashes are caused by some sort of driver distraction. If the issue for the community is driver behavior, it doesn't make sense to further restrict the movement of the pedestrians. Simply put, the proposed ordinance does not address the problem at hand. Better policies for protecting pedestrians and other vulnerable road users include complete streets and Vision Zero, which can more effectively support initiatives like the effective sidewalk program Merriam already has in place. Bike Walk KC opposes this ordinance and asks each of you to do the same. Then we have a second comment from Stacy Shavetta, 5541 Goodman Street. It says, this has been weighing on me for weeks since I started seeing public comments about it in the council meeting notes. But I am just so disheartened by the language and reasoning to amend Chapter 68. Instead of pushing homeless and jobless people out of our community, we need to be finding ways to help them and get them back on their feet. Shawnee recently amended their city code to allow homeless shelters and warming stations to operate in churches, etc. What can we do to create a neighborly space like that? We are a small community, and that's what I love about Merriam. But it's not a very small town-like idea in my book, to push people out because it makes us uncomfortable. I know that most are arguing that this is a public safety issue and that these intersections are deemed places where accidents with pedestrians are more likely to happen. I vehemently disagree with that. It feels very much like this reasoning is being used to cover up the fact that this issue is making people uncomfortable, and they don't want to believe that our pristine city would have an issue with homeless people. And those were the only two public comments tonight, Mayor.
Very good. Very good. We'll move next to our consent agenda. All items that are listed under the heading are considered to be routine by City Council, may be enacted in one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless a council member requests, in which case that item will be removed from the consent agenda and considered separately. We have two items this evening on the consent agenda. Is there desire on the part of any council members to remove either of these two items this evening? None? Okay. I will then entertain a motion to accept these two items. Bob Pate.
I'd move the council approve consent agenda items 1 and 2, Mayor.
And Chris Hans.
I'll second that.
Motion's made and seconded. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Hans.
Aye.
Councilmember Caldwell.
Aye.
Councilmember Knapp.
Aye.
Councilmember Neal.
Aye.
Councilmember Pate.
Aye.
Councilmember Silvers.
Aye.
Councilmember Yadrich.
Aye.
Councilmember DeBold.
Aye.
Motion passes 8-0.
Very good, thank you. I have nothing listed this evening under the mayor's report. We will move into council items. And for discussion on the first item, which is to consider approval of an ordinance amending Chapter 68 of the Merriam Municipal Code regarding prohibition of pedestrians on medians and roadways at certain intersections. This is an item that came from the police department, so I'll refer my time goes next to Chief McLaughlin. You can fill us in on anything we need to know before we consider this.
Evening, Mayor and Council. This is the second reading. Nothing has changed in the ordinance from last time. And so I'm just going to open it up for any questions or clarifications.
Very good. Anyone have any comments, questions, or concerns? Mr. Yadrich, your hand's up. I'll go ahead and call on you first.
This is Whitney Aldrich. So Chief, I want to thank you for following up via email with me on a couple of my requests this week, since we all know I'm very into data. So you sent me something that was very valuable, which was the PDF of the crash reports that you guys have to take and fill in. And I was looking through the crash codes sheet, and there are a few fields under the driver distracted by section. I think they're numbered. I don't know if it's like crash code 20 through 24 or their numbers 20 through 24. Do we track those codes for analysis, or is it just that distracted driving has their own code and there's no subcategory for distracted driving codes?
The codes that are listed on the code sheet are what's entered into the database.
Okay, so based on that, we should have the like subcategories for distracted driving accidents that are caused by, and I'm paraphrasing these because there's a lot of PDFs up here. My computer's being sensitive. So basically cell phones, another for other types of electronics, one for in-vehicle distractions, one for general inattention, and another one for distractions outside the vehicle. Is it possible to gather that data and send it to the council. And I would have asked in advance, but we just finished this email correspondence like earlier today.
Yeah, it's possible.
Okay. I would like to see it, regardless of whether or not we're able to see that data and then move a vote to next week or next meeting, or if we end up voting tonight. And I'll follow up via email. I have a follow-up question as well. If anyone else has questions, I don't want to take all the space
Oh, go ahead.
initially.
Yeah.
So you answered this also via email, but one of my questions was if we, what is the process for adjusting or adding data points to the information collected for any incident or offense? Like, is it a heavy lift? Is it dictated by someone else? And you responded with, it's correct that the Department of Transportation mandates the information you collect.
Right.
Did they change things often, or is it kind of copy paste from year to year?
They change it. I've never tracked how often it changes, but it changes frequently, I guess, depending on what your definition of frequently is. They don't
government frequently.
You're right. I mean, it's just, they don't let us know when they're doing what they're doing. They just say, hey, here we've amended the report, and we have to scramble to fix it on the front and back end of what we do. So I don't know. Since I've been here, that accident report has changed several different times, several different fashions, and it's just at their whim whenever the Department of Transportation decides they need to collect a new data point. As you can see by the immense amount of information they're already collecting, it is sometimes very frustrating on our end, because the amount of information that we're required to collect on every accident. So there's really probably not a lot of space for any additional information or need, because it's already so intense.
For context, there are fields and fields and fields on that PDF, so I don't envy you. Sorry.
Yeah, I would just, for the sake of the council who hasn't seen that form, it's pages and of there's lots of data. This is not a ticket. This is actually a 4, maybe 5 page, just so the council understands that this is lots of data fields. There's 75 to 100 data fields, maybe.
It's
Just
10
guessing.
full PDF pages, and each page
this is
has
reams of data for every
dozens,
accident.
of codes. So
Now, and to be fair, I mean, you fill out all those pages on the worst case scenario, a tanker truck with hazardous material on it rolls over a school bus. You're going to be filling out 100 plus. On most accidents, it's not quite all 5 pages. It's probably just 4 of them. But you get the point. Is that they have thought this through, and they collect a lot of data because they want to know what's going on their roads and streets.
anyone else have questions? Because I have a couple more. Jason, I'm sorry. I'll
No.
cede to Jason.
Whitney, I'm okay with just letting you roll through yours, and then I'd like to ask one when you're done.
Go ahead.
All right. I have a little dog party going over here. One of my questions is, you also provided some data for me on the, I'm pulling it up also just so I can be sure that I have the right thing. If you hear noises, my dogs are fine. They're just very spoiled. All right. I looked at the total estimated number of cars that go through those intersections versus what we count as distracted driving accidents over the last 10 years. And it's a percentage, obviously, because COVID would affect actual numbers quite a bit. And then pedestrians hit by vehicles at those same intersections over the last 10 years. And it looks like there were only 8 pedestrians hit by a vehicle in those intersections. And there are, give or take, 90 something million cars a year, I think is what I did in my math. So what constitutes the difference between a pedestrian incident or pedestrian hit by a vehicle versus a distracted driving accident that involves a pedestrian? Is it actually the car hitting a pedestrian?
I understand your question. Are you asking me what the definition of a pedestrian accident is? Is that?
Yeah, that simplifies it. Yeah.
It's a pedestrian that is struck by a moving vehicle.
Okay. I think for now, those are the only, well, one more question. If we do end up passing the ordinance tonight, is it possible to include citations for it in our weekly police report that we get going forward? Just like you guys think, and thank you again for doing this, included use of force incidents after we had that discussion.
I will have to get back with you on that. I'm sure it's possible. I got to figure out what the mechanism I'm going to have to put in place to search the ticket database to find out if a ticket was written on that or not, because it's going to be just a misdemeanor violation. So we'll look into it and I will let you know. I don't think it's going to be a problem. In my mind's eye, I just don't have it pictured how I'm going to do it yet, but we'll figure it out.
And just so the council is aware, I would like to see the data on the subcategories of distracted driving accidents before we have a vote. But that's the end of my questions. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Jason? Do you have-
Yes, this is Councilman Silvers. First of all, I'd like to just reiterate Whitney's request for additional data before putting this to vote. She and I had been communicating over the past few days and had some of the same concerns or questions, and it'd be nice to get this answered before we move on. But if we do vote today or in the future on this, I do have a question for council in regards to some wording in the ordinance, and I was just wanting some clarification and to see if possibly it should be reworded. And I know you're the expert, so me asking you that's probably frustrating on your part, so I apologize in advance. But I noticed a couple times in this ordinance, it is mentioned that this is to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens of the city of Merriam. And it continues on. Since we have such a high number of vehicles that pass through Merriam that are not Merriam residents, I was wondering if that should be changed to persons traveling in and through Merriam, or some wording such as that.
No, that's a change we could certainly make, and that makes sense.
That is all I had.
Yeah, the fact that's a good point, because most of the accidents that occur in our city do not involve Merriam residents, as we have such a transient population that drives through our city. I have a question though for Ms. Shadrich on the subcategory information. It's my understanding, and I haven't seen the listing, but I'm pretty sure just from my recollection of how the accident reports work, and I could be wrong because they've added things, but I don't think the subcategories are going to necessarily sub out a category specific to the people that this ordinance involves when it comes to distracted driving. So in other words, if you're looking for a subcategory that talks about people standing in the median, solicitors, or whatever it is that you're looking for, I'm not sure that you're going to find a subcategory. Chief, does that sound right, or do you think there is a subcategory specific to that?
Yeah, you're right on that, Mayor. And I'll tell you right now, without even pulling the data, I've seen snippets of it. the one that's going to be probably 90, 85, 90% of the total numbers in inattentive driving. Most people don't admit to, I was on my cell phone. Most people don't admit they were looking up at the clouds. They just say, I don't know what happened. I didn't see whatever, or whatever the case may be, you know, human nature being what it is. So inattentive driving is going to be the highest category because they have no clue as to what they were paying attention to. And most of them will not admit they were on their cell phone.
It's a fact that I don't know what the percentage is, but I would say it's a decent percent that a lot of the accidents are rear end accidents where at an intersection like this, where a person fails to realize that the car in front of them is stopped. Would you say that's a fair assessment? You get quite a few accidents that are like that.
Yeah, I mean, in my experience, I haven't, you know, I haven't been that deep into this data here. We, you know, it was general, you know, 10,000 foot view of accidents and their general causes. My experience working the accidents over the last, well, I worked an accident 15 or 20 years ago when I was working accidents as a street officer. Most of them were the rear end type accidents.
And I'm the same way. I wouldn't say necessarily most of them, but I'd say there's a lot of them. So on an accident report, when somebody is getting ready to make a left-hand turn and they are looking around and they didn't recognize that the car in front of them was stopped and they run into the back of it, then the inattentive driving that's cited on the person who caused the accident was the fact that they weren't looking up at the car and didn't noticing it's stopping. And one of the issues I think with this particular ordinance is that having people in intersections that are there maybe to solicit funds will commonly cause a vehicle to stop in order for the person to get the money. And a lot of times accidents could occur when the people behind them don't pay any attention to the fact that the person stopped, even though the light is showing green to turn left. For whatever reason, this guy just makes a sudden stop because, again, they didn't anticipate him stopping to help out somebody who's soliciting funds. And then they have an accident. I mean, I've worked a number of those kinds of accidents. And it is inattentive driving, but it's inattention caused by an indirect cause. And it's not going to be reflected properly on an accident report, which makes the data insufficient to actually determine what it is you want.
So
that's a good point. It's really hard. It's really hard to start taking these bits of data that are showing up in these accident reports and start applying them to specific acts or actions of all the people that were involved around. And we may be getting really deep here. And I just think, you know, the perspective is that those medians that we're talking about are in the busiest intersections in the city, and there are highest accidents. The cause of the accidents, there's just a lot of accidents in those intersections. The reality of it is those medians are not designed for pedestrians doing anything. Those medians are there to keep traffic from going across the lanes and hitting each other, and to direct motions of the vehicles. They were not designed or intended for anybody to be in them or on them for any reason. And common sense just dictates is, you know, someone standing in the middle of Shawnee Mission Parkway during rush hour is not a safe activity for the motorist and for the pedestrian. No matter what they're doing, their activity is not an issue here. The issue is are the streets designed to have people standing in the middle of them during rush hour when anything and everything can happen because of any reason? It's my opinion, this is the reason why I brought it up, is that is not a safe activity on those streets at those locations, because we didn't design them to accommodate pedestrians standing at handing out paper or receiving donations. This is just a common sense safety issue. Is that, you know, is that a location that we have accommodated for that activity? And we have not, because no one stands in the middle of the road to do any kind of activity but drive. So, I mean, that's why we didn't dig as deep as everybody's asking here in the information or the data, because it's not a cause and effect thing that we're looking at. We're looking at, are we trying to push activity that shouldn't be going on in those intersections because of the problems that we're having with accidents and the amount of volume.
I have a follow-up, if you don't mind. Oh,
Just before you do, let me see what.
Chris,
Mr.
would you
Will-
like to go?
Chris, would you?
Yeah, I would just like to, I just want to add to what Chief said that I think the data, well, we will clearly get whatever data we can get. The data is not 100% what this is all about. And most of this is not even about what I think most people are trying to make this about, which is panhandling, solicitors, things like this. This is a safety ordinance. I just want to read a few of the whereases in the ordinance, because we're getting hung up on the data from the action form, but the whereases in the ordinance is really the spirit, it's the intent of the ordinance. So if I could,
Go ahead.
I'm gonna kind of not include every single word for brevity's sake, but starting with the first one, the chief of police has investigated and has determined that the presence of persons on medians and on certain traffic ways presents a risk to the health and safety of pedestrians. Why? Due to the proximity of pedestrians to oncoming traffic at such traffic ways. So the police chief has investigated and determined. He's a professional. That's what we pay him to do. We pay him to investigate, to use data, to use experience, to use his gut, to then make some sort of determination on how to keep pedestrians and keep motorists safe within our community. He has identified that, to the best of his ability, that the proximity of pedestrians to oncoming traffic, it creates a hazard. And as he said, it seems to be common sense. Second, whereas the high volume of motor vehicles combined with the presence of pedestrians, saying the same exact thing, the high volume of motor vehicles combined with the presence of pedestrians creates inherently dangerous circumstances. That seems like common sense. It's not a data issue. That's a common sense issue. Third, whereas the governing body, which is you folks, finds that pedestrians distracting drivers from driving in a safe and attentive manner by approaching a stopped vehicle, attracting or attempting to attract attention of a driver, or otherwise inhibiting drivers' ability to focus on the task of driving, creates a public safety hazard. I'm not sure how the data would force us to disagree with any of these common sense things. When we are out working in the intersections, when we have staff work in the intersections, we have cones and lights and yellow reflective vests. It's dangerous out there. The chief will tell you that it was only about 2 weeks ago that on the highway with lights on the side of the road, someone still plowed into one of our street cars or one of our squad cars. It is not safe to be in traffic. Our infrastructure standards say that sidewalks should be a certain width and when possible should not be adjacent to traffic. Speed limits in our residential areas are 25 miles an hour. We still separate, usually by at least 2 foot of grass, the sidewalk from the traffic because it's inherently unsafe to have pedestrians next to traffic. As the chief said, we didn't design medians for standing platforms. We did not make them 3 foot wide or 4 foot wide. They are there to separate traffic from crossing over and running into someone else. And the comment that I heard about distracted driving, the distraction occurring inside of a car, I would argue if there's distraction inside of a car, the worst place you could be is standing in the middle of the road. You're target number one for someone who is distracted driving through an intersection. So again, it seems to me that this is a bad idea to stand in these intersections. We are not banning or prohibiting anything. If people want to stand on the corners, they can walk 30 foot to the left, 30 foot to the right. We are not prohibiting anything in this community. We're simply saying that it does not make sense at these 9 of 388 intersections to stand in the middle of the road. Now, whether the data helps reinforce that, enforce that, make people say that it still doesn't matter, it's not common sense, I don't know what the data is going to do with that, but we're happy to produce that data. I think that we're having a data conversation And we're getting away from the fact that we've asked our police chief to investigate and to make a determination on how we can improve safety in our intersections. And that's what he's done. So I just want to make sure that the residents of Merriam and the people that are on the call recognize that our police chief, who is a professional, has done what he's supposed to do. We've done what we're supposed to do, is make these recommendations, and that we all on the call, I'm sure, agree that this is common sense, that people should not stand on the intersections. If there's some other reason that we think that they should, or we should allow them to, it clearly cannot be because of public safety. I just want to make sure that that's clear. I hope by head nod. Thank you.
Chris Hands, did you have a comment?
I just want to say, I appreciate that some people are asking for more data. I do not need more data. I have anecdotally seen enough situations that I just do not believe anybody belongs in the median. My point of reference is 75th Street. I swear, I've thought for a long, long time, somebody is going to get killed there, and then we're going to look like we're negligent and taking care of things. So I don't need more data.
Mr. Neff?
Yes, Brian Neff. Assuming this ordinance does pass tonight or in the future, how is an ordinance change communicated to the general public?
Well, for this particular one, it would be posted. Like we would post this at those 9 intersections, but it would make it out in all of our regular channels of information. It would have to it has to be posted in the legal record, or at least some sort of reference to that in the legal record. So it would be publicly noticed. I see the city attorney nodding, so I believe that that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
I think maybe it'd be a good time for the chief to remind everyone about, again, we talked about in the first presentation, that it's not the intent of the police departments to write a lot of tickets on this. They don't really waste their time having to do that. We can just get people to understand it's not legal. Most of them won't solicit there, and it won't be a problem. So you can reinforce that if you'd like, Chief, on warnings and education and so on.
Yeah, I mean, we've already talked to our sergeants about this ordinance, that, that it was up for a vote and what we were going to do if it was passed. And this is not something that all of a sudden you're going to see us out there and writing a bunch of tickets. It's not our goal to write a bunch of tickets. I don't want to write a bunch of tickets. We are going to educate and explain the ordinance to people, and explain to them why it's not safe for them to be there, and get them to voluntarily comply. So, I don't want to go out there and start writing a bunch of tickets on this. It's not the point of the ordinance. The ordinance is, for us to safely be able to maneuver through those intersections, and for the safety of the people involved. And we're going to let them know what their alternatives are, and
Mayor, this is Council Member Neal, raising my hand on an audio call.
Go right ahead, Mr. Neal.
Yes. In the last meeting, I talked about my own experiences with, since I live literally 3 houses away from Antioch and Shawnee Mission Parkway, I go through that intersection almost every time that I leave my house. And I have personally been one of those people that has nearly had an inattentive driving accident on at least 2 occasions. And specifically, for example, the median over I-35 that allows access to southbound traffic on I-35 has 2 left turn lanes. And so I have seen on a number of occasions actually people standing in that median asking for donations. The light changes, the one lane goes, or somebody is actually stopped in the second lane, and the traffic starts moving, and of course everybody's looking at the light, and they assume that traffic's moving, and they start moving, and they may not be attentive to the fact that there's still a car sitting there, and somebody may go around that car. It's just to to me, it is a dangerous situation. That's the issue. The issue of the other issues that have been brought up, I think, have a lot of merit in terms of, providing opportunities for people who, to raise funds to help, with their situations. But I just don't think that this particular ordinance is really that issue. I think this is absolutely a safety issue. I just think we need to, that it's appropriate to pass it.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Pape.
Yeah, this is Councilman Pape. I have a question. I'm not sure if this is directed toward Ryan or toward the chief, but in the prohibition on B1, it says it shall be unlawful for any person to stand, sit, or otherwise go upon any median or roadway or remain upon or alongside any median. This says or roadway at any intersections within the borders of the city of Merriam identified. So my question, I think we talked about this before, Chief, but and to me that sounds like even if they were on the side of the road. I mean, I'm as Councilman Neal said, against people standing in the median, but I'm not so against people standing on the side of the roadway. Does that also prohibit them from standing beside the roadway? Not in the roadway, but say on the sidewalk.
I didn't interpret that. We're not going to enforce it as that. I think Ryan and I talked about this, and we didn't think that was going to be the issue. So,
You see my concern on how that reads?
Right, but from the first meeting, it was pretty plainly established that sidewalks would be off limits as it relates to this ordinance. However, there are places where a person could be standing where a sidewalk doesn't exist, just because we haven't installed one there. And in that case, that's not a place for pedestrians to be. Sidewalks are places for pedestrians to be, so therefore this doesn't apply. There again, in most of these intersections, there are sidewalks present. But so I don't think it's going to make a difference. We can't regulate what a person does on the sidewalk. They can hold signs, they can do what they have. Now, when they step out in the street, though, if they're on a sidewalk and they step out in the street to collect or contact a motorist, that's a whole different thing. They're not on the sidewalk when they're doing that. But on the sidewalk, they're okay. I think that's what we talked about last time.
Yeah, that was my understanding. I just wanted to clarify that after reading that, that was read properly and that we wouldn't be doing that. My other question is that I assume that the ramifications or the fines that will be levied, that's just consistent with everything we have for that type of, $499 and or 1 to 30 days in jail seems pretty steep, but I know that's not necessarily what they would get, or, they probably wouldn't serve any jail time. But my question is, I guess, can we regulate that? Is there anything to be less of a fine, or is that just common that all those type of misdemeanors, that's can be up to that? I guess I just want clarification on that.
The latter part of what you said, Councilman, is true. So that would be the maximum fine for that infraction. Ultimately, it's left to the municipal court judge as to whatever fine he would assess for this type of violation.
If I could add to that, we ran this through the judge, and the judge knows that our intent is not to fine people that don't have the means to pay. It's not to send people. It's not to create a debtor's prison for people. I mean, that's would go against the spirit of everything that we do. But there has to be, as you know, there has to be some sort of punitive piece of this legislation. And so, but the judge knows that that's not the intent. The intent is truly to educate, to inform. And when you have repeat offenders, or you have people that tell the police officers to go fly a kite, and I don't expect they would, but if they do, there needs to be some sort of penalty for continued infraction. But our goal is to educate. Our goal is to point people towards resources. if these are, if they're people that truly need resources, if these are, people that are there for a church group or some other thing, but, we're not incompassionate people, dispassionate people. We want to be able to point people. I believe that the chief actually has a resource guide that's essentially a flyer that has, it's got all of it, it's got all of the resources that someone that was seeking help or assistance or needed help or assistance that they could want. All of the county resources, shelter information, phone numbers, addresses. Those are things that have been put together so that if there are people that are genuinely in need in our intersections or anywhere else in our community, that we can compassionately deal with them. Again, well, there is that piece of it that's just because there has to be. It's not our intent to even get to that point.
Ms. Yadrich, you had your hand up.
I do. I hope you're enjoying the show of my dogs and my niece running around in the background. So I have one last comment. And that is, so if we are taking up voting on a data-driven ordinance, I expect that asking questions about data is not an intention to agonize anyone or antagonize. I'm sure I've caused agony with my questions, antagonize anyone, but it's part of my job as a representative and all of your jobs as a representative. And I expect if, as the agenda sheet says, that we are using data-driven approaches to crime and traffic study, that I can ask questions about data. And if the data is there, it's yes. If the data is not there, it's no. I'm making no conclusions based on the data. I'm asking about data-driven traffic safety. And I'm doing that not just for people in Merriam, but for also the 90+ million cars that go through these 9 intersections on an annual basis. What I'm worried about is that we are passing a law based on anecdote, and that is not a precedent I'm willing to set. And because the chief is an expert and because the city staff is an expert, I expect that I can ask questions and that they'll be willing to answer my questions. And I look forward to more data-driven crime analysis because I think it's fascinating and I think it's a great way to address the community. But all I ask is that if we're going to discuss data and we're going to talk about it in a way that, yes, might affect 30 people of the millions of cars that come through our city, a life is a life, a car is a car, a person's a person, a driver's a driver. No one is more important than anyone else. And numbers can tell a lot of different stories. So that's where I'm at on this. And I've certainly been patient listening to other people ask questions on other topics as well. And I have done my reading. So thank you for answering my questions, Chief. I know that I've made it a difficult couple of weeks for you in doing that. And I appreciate your time.
Mr. Silvers.
Yes. So the point I wanted to make and to just bring up for the other council people to think about real quick. But before I do that, I do want to say that I completely respect the chief and his expert knowledge on this. And by no means am I trying to undermine his research on this, but there are some areas in the city of Merriam that people who don't have access to cars have very difficult times traversing. And one of those is Cheyenne Mission Parkway crossing I-35. There are no sidewalks, and the only means for them to do that, if they need to get from east to west or west to east, is to use the median. So if we pass this ordinance, we will be criminalizing people without vehicles from merely crossing east to west or west to east, or expecting them to go all the way to 67th or down all the way to Johnson Drive to get across I-35. And because of that, I have an issue with this ordinance. I believe it becomes a bit of a socioeconomic issue, and it's not necessarily talking about whether people are panhandling and standing on corners, but people's freedom to move about the city.
Okay, Mr. Pape.
Yeah, I know I talked about this the last meeting, but I'd just like to reiterate it one more time. We as the fire department, every Labor Day, we collected for MDA, and we were out in the intersections and collecting with our boots, obviously fire boots, and collect a lot of money. And it was always for a good cause. But it was probably 10 years ago. We quit doing it because it was dangerous. I don't know that all fire departments have done that, have quit collecting at the intersections, but I have seen a lot of them relocating into other locations like Town Center and off of the roadways because of that particular problem. We never had anybody injured, but we did have a few people get brushed by vehicles during that time frame when we were doing it for years. It's kind of ironic, I guess, and I hate to even mention this, but my car broke down today, actually at Antioch and Johnson Drive. And I had to call the police department to come and put their lights on while I waited to have my vehicle towed out of that intersection. I wasn't completely in the intersection, but I was the first car heading southbound on Antioch at Johnson Drive. And I didn't feel safe out there during that time frame while I was waiting for the police to show up with their lights and block the traffic, and cars were trying to go around me on both sides. And it really was, kind of scary, I guess, as I used to do that for a living, but just trying to stay out of the traffic. So I do think this is a safety issue. Medians, there's no place for people to be. We quit doing it. I have empathy for panhandlers. Those people, I will continue to give money to them as I see them, but I don't want them in the medians doing it, or any other organization, or fire departments, police departments, or anybody out there in the medians. That's just my take on it. Thank you.
Ms. Hands, you had your hand up.
I was just going to say, we have an exception if people are actually crossing the street, they are not in violation. It's people who linger on the medians. So I'm not quite understanding Mr. Silver's point. I'm sorry.
My point was, if someone wants to cross I-35 at Shawnee Mission Parkway, their only means of doing that even remotely safely is to walk down the median. And using the median in that way, according to this ordinance, would be a Class C misdemeanor with up to a $599 fine if stopped by the police. To the discretion of the officer, I should say. But I understand that using the crosswalks is allowed, but when you have no access to a sidewalk, and that's your only way to get across that roadway, across I-35 using that roadway, that artery, if this ordinance passes, people will be risking jail time or a fine. And I'm not sure if that's necessarily fair.
Yeah, this is Councilmember Neal. I also raised my hand again.
Right ahead, Mr. Neal.
Is there a way to put some language in that creates an exception for that particular situation that Councilmember Silvers is describing? Because I believe that that is also, I mean, I recognize that's a problem. It's also an intersection. If I'm correct, I don't know what that bridge, I don't know how much control we have of that, and I don't assume that they're going to rebuild that bridge anytime soon, but that is a valid point. On that one particular location, what is the, I don't know what the sense of the rest of the council is on that, but I would certainly consider some sort of an exception for that one particular situation, if that would alleviate his concern.
My read of this is that being in the median is relative to the intersections. It's not, if the people that I see I mean, I've seen people in the medians clearly, but the people that I see crossing Shawnee Mission Parkway are crossing I-35 at Shawnee Mission Parkway are the majority of them are on the sides. But the way that this is written is that it's relative to the intersections. So once they're in transit, they're no longer by the intersections.
This is Councilman Silvers. I don't disagree with you, Chris, except there are multiple intersections and turn lanes that people have to traverse to get from one side to the other using the median. So I can count 1, 2, 3. I can count 3 to 4 times when someone would be at an intersection on the median if they're using the median to get across I-35.
But if they're crossing, then that's a legal action. If they're crossing there, are they of these 9? I mean, if they're just.
But there's no crosswalk where they would have to cross. I know I'm getting into the minutia of it, but law is to be interpreted, and so if we don't spell it out in detail, it's up to the person who interprets it, and then we can be causing some. My biggest concern is misinterpreting of an ordinance and causing people who don't have a lot of means issues that can affect their bank account, their livelihood, their freedom to move, freedom from not being placed in jail.
I respect that, and I don't disagree, and we can clearly try to reinterpret that, but I guess I find it hard to believe that one of our officers would interpret that to the detriment of someone's ability to move among the city. 2, I think then that the city prosecutor would not understand the spirit of what we were talking about and be able to take that into account. And then 3, the judge to do the same and still try to enforce this ordinance. Crazy things have happened. It is absolutely possible that could happen. It is not, but I mean, it would require all of those things to occur for this to actually come into play. I mean, it would require 3 people to completely overlook what's clearly happening in front of them.
And Councilman Silvers, I'm reading the ordinance, and so section B1 says unlawful for any person stand, sit, or otherwise go upon any median or roadway identified by, subsection D. And there's an and in there. So it's not an or, it's an and. And while they're doing that, they have to approach a vehicle stopped on the roadway or attempt to attract the attention of the driver or occupant of a motor vehicle at any such intersection. In addition, they shall not activate a crosswalk for any purpose other than traffic to stop to allow the person to lawfully cross the roadway. It's prima facie evidence of the violation of this subsection if the person remains on the median or roadway identified in section D of this section through 2 consecutive opportunities to lawfully cross the roadway. So it's not just a mere fact they're on the median, it's they're on the median and they're conducting activities to distract the drivers or contact the drivers of the motor vehicles. So them just walking across the median to get from one point of the bridge to the other, although not safe, and I've never seen anybody do it, to be honest with you, is not technically illegal by this ordinance and will not be enforced as such.
And I'd like to make a comment with regard to the suggestion that Mr. Pape had. This intersection, Shawnee Mission Parkway and I-35, was designed by the state of Kansas. It was designed not to be a roadway for pedestrians in any place between the exit ramps on either side. We would definitely, I think, be ill-advised to write anything in the ordinance that allows them to do so, because then we take on the liability by allowing it when that intersection is simply not designed for pedestrians. And I'm putting a certain amount of blame on that on the state of Kansas. That is a horribly designed intersection. We've made them very clear that it's been very clear that we felt that way to them on many occasions, and they offer very few solutions. But that's a great point, Mr. Silvers, that people do from time to time do that. And it's very risky, whether it's on the side of the road or the median. And we would certainly discourage them from doing that. But again, that none of this really applies to this ordinance. Which being said, unless we have further comments, I've got a couple things we need to discuss. I have Councilman Yadrich, who has made a suggestion that we table this, and I want to make sure that she and others understand the process for doing that. This is on the agenda. So in order to table it, I'm going to need a motion to table it, and then I have to have a vote from the entire council on whether that's the direction they want to go. If at the point that we have the vote and they wish to table it, then we'll move to table it. If the vote fails, then we move forward. Somebody makes a motion, we decide whether or not it's going to pass based on the vote. So that's kind of the process. And again, I'd like to ask Mr. Engel and Mr. Dank to make sure that that is in conformance with what we know the process to be. We don't get this a lot of times, so I think that's what we've done in the past.
That's correct, Mayor.
Okay.
They just need to do it to some, do they need to name the date, or is it just table it to a future meeting?
Table automatically brings it up at the next meeting.
So it will come to the next meeting.
Right.
Gotcha.
I think there's been an exception when the data is not readily available and it takes longer, then there can be a suggestion that be a month, but
Yeah.
if it's not stated, it's the next meeting.
Yeah, that's a little different than tabling it. That's continuing the item till either a date certain or till an
Okay.
act is performed.
Important distinction. All right, so if there's no question about that process, then I'd refer Ms. Yedrich to see if she wants to make such a request in the form of a motion to table.
Yes. And I assume for the record, I would just read the language of the motion as it is in the last page of the agenda packet.
You mean to table? Yeah, and then you recognize that we're going to need a second on this vote as well.
I do recognize that. Yes.
Okay, yeah, you can certainly add that into that language, sure.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, I move that the council tables an ordinance amending Chapter 68 of the Merriam Code of Ordinances prohibiting pedestrians upon medians and roadways in certain intersections until a later date.
Okay, the only amendment I would say would be you're going to move to a motion to postpone it till the next council meeting. Because otherwise,
The next council
yeah, there
meeting.
you go.
Okay.
Everything else.
You want me to repackage
No,
that? And
No, as long as we all understand that, we're good.
Okay, thank you.
Motion
Thanks,
made.
Julie.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, motion's made and second to move this to the next meeting. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Yes. Councilmember Caldwell.
No.
Councilmember Naff.
Aye.
Councilmember Neal.
Nay.
Councilmember Pape.
No.
Councilmember Silvers.
Aye.
Councilmember Yadrich,
Aye.
Councilmember DeVold,
No.
Councilmember Hans,
No.
motion fails. 5-3.
All right, that being said, unless there's further discussion, I'll need a motion to approve this ordinance. I can't see, Scott, I'll pick you first.
I have a comment. I
Okay.
don't want to make a motion. I think, again, I respect Jason and Whitney, where you're going with this. But I think we're making the ordinance something that it's not. We have a lot of issues. We have a lot of issues in our society. Okay. This ordinance is not meant to help with those, or it's also not meant to hurt those either. Okay. And I think we as a council, if we want to address those other issues, okay, that I know I've received an email and some others may have as well, but that it addresses some issues that saying, that this ordinance is just making them worse. Well, again, I don't believe that to be true. And I think it's being made out to be something it's not. It's about safety for somebody standing there in the median. It's safety about somebody driving. It's safety about somebody riding a bike on the roadways. The roadways are meant for cars, not people. Okay, unless they're on the sidewalk. Okay, and again, that's my feeling. I just want to make sure I said that. Thank you.
I'll entertain you, Ms. Hans.
I would like to know, I really did like the broadening language that Mr. Silvers mentioned about not just making it Merriam resident centric, and just wondering what that's going to sound like, and if we can include that in what we're passing or hopefully passing tonight.
So this is Ryan Dink. I took a shot at it. I think if you simply strike the reference to, quote, the citizens of Merriam and change that to motorists, that fixes it. It's not just Merriam motorists, it's all motorists. And so you could make a motion that the ordinance be approved with that language change, if you all know what you're voting on.
But
Chief.
we're also protecting our pedestrians as well, right?
Yes.
This is Councilmember Neal. I was also going to suggest that we add motorists and pedestrians.
Okay.
I think we can make that change. Motorists and pedestrians.
So does someone need to make a motion to do that?
It can be included in the original motion. You can make the original motion with the following changes, and then they become automatic. Somebody wants to, if anybody's interested in doing that, raise your hand. Okay, I've got Bob Pate.
Yeah, Mayor, I'd move the council approve an ordinance amending chapter 68 of the Merriam Code of Ordinance prohibiting pedestrians upon medians and roadways in certain intersections with the amendment of motorist, the change indicating motorist and pedestrians be added in.
Very good. And Chris, you had your hand up first.
And I'll second.
There's a motion and a second, Madam Clerk.
Councilmember Naff,
Aye.
Councilmember Neal,
Aye.
Councilmember Pape,
Aye.
Councilmember Silvers,
Nay.
Councilmember Yadrich,
Nay.
Councilmember DeVold,
Aye.
Councilmember Hans,
Aye.
Councilmember Caldwell.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0,
Very good.
or 7-2, I'm sorry, 7-2.
6-2.
6-2.
Can't add. Sorry,
Get your calculator out.
I might need to.
Councilman Hans, did you have a comment or question? You had your hand up while we were voting. I didn't know. All right. Okay, let's move to the next item, which has to do with the establishment of pole attachments and on the right of way. Who wants to take the narrative on that? Mr. Engel.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. Next item on the agenda is consider approval of a resolution establishing pole attachment and other fees for the location of small cell facilities in city right-of-way or attachment to city property. What this is this establishes fees for carriers to install small cell technology in the right-of-way, potentially on city facilities, facilities being defined as buildings or existing light poles. This is a fee resolution. It does not mean we are giving approval to anyone to do that tonight. We are simply saying that should we approve that in a future agreement with a carrier, these would be the fees. So included is a resolution establishing that those fees will exist and a copy of the schedule of fees that gets approved every year. So there's an abbreviated version of the schedule of fees that are in there. What you will see in there is there's a couple fees that have an asterisk next to them. I want to call those out specifically. The FCC in a ruling ruled that cities could establish a reasonable approximation of the cost in establishing their own fees. However, the FCC also came out and set what they call a safe harbor, in quotation marks, of annual fee of $270 a site that has been challenged in court. As that is playing out in court, we still have to move forward and conduct business. So what you will see is fees that are established in the schedule of fees in the amount of about $540. The FCC safe harbor amount is $270. That simply says that we say that it's $540, but we recognize that the FCC says that it's $270. It gives the carriers, when we actually reach an agreement with carriers, the ability to pay $270, but it puts in the caveat that if the FCC case actually plays out and they can't establish that rate, that the carriers would have 60 days to pay us back. It is quite possible, although not likely, that they will pay us what we are saying the fees are. I'm pretty sure they're just going to go ahead and pay us the $270. But that's what that asterisk is. These agreements we've talked about for months and months now. These are the small cell agreements that this is the resolution, and then the agreements that'll be coming forward, these master right-of-way agreements. All of the city attorneys in Johnson County have been working together to establish a master agreement. And so that's what this is, kind of the first salvo of that is this resolution establishing fees. So our fees are aligned with our neighbors in this. So we are not standing alone in this issue. So we have established these fees just as our neighbors have same fees, and they're approaching it the same way, that there's this safe harbor rate, but that's not what we believe the rate should be. But we recognize that we can't ask them or we can't demand more until that's actually played out in court. So that being said, I'm happy to answer any questions. Again, I would tell you that this is just a resolution for fees, but there will be coming soon agreement with carriers that will be asking to operate within our right of way. And again, this just simply says that you can't do it for free. But I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Mr. Neal?
Yeah, this is Councilmember Neal. I want to say that I really applaud the way that we've handled this. This particular issue is one of the issues that I've been working on with the National League of Cities, the Information Technology and Communications Committee. The FCC has been mandating a number of things upon municipal governments and I assume county governments as well, and local governments, that really should be in my view, something that falls under local control. And so this case is actually a big deal nationally. And so what we've done here, and I appreciate it, is we've tried to figure out what we believe is a fair price, given the costs of reviewing these applications. And the FCC has said in their order that actually here's what we think a fair cost is, but that was heavily influenced by intensive lobbying from the large telecom companies. And so I like the way we've done this, so they know what we think the fee should be, as well as obviously they can choose how to respond to that, pay what the FCC says, or go ahead and pay what we think is a fair fee. And so I wanted to say that I appreciate the work that was done on this. I think it fits very well with the type of ordinance that the National League of Cities would probably like to see passed across the nation, because it's a local control issue as well. Thank you.
Very good. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, I'll accept the motion in a second. Mr. Pape.
Yeah, Mayor, I'd move the council approve a resolution establishing pole attachment and other fees for small cell facilities in city right-of-way or attachment to city property, and amend the schedule of fees to add the associated fees.
Councilmember Neal, I'd like to second that.
This motion's been made and seconded. Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Neal,
Aye.
Councilmember Pate,
Aye.
Councilmember Silvers,
Aye.
Councilmember Yodrich,
Aye.
Councilmember DeBold,
Aye.
Councilmember Hands,
Aye.
Councilmember Caldwell,
Aye.
Councilmember Nath.
Aye.
Motion passes 8-0.
Very good. Thank you. Item number 3 this evening is the Merriam Community Center final financial report. Meredith, would
Good
you like to
evening.
provide an update? Let's see.
Yes, I would. Let me share my screen. All right, just confirming that everyone can see my PowerPoint. Great. So now that our project has wrapped up, I wanted to provide an update to you with where we stand with the budget. You all have seen this slide every month for almost 3 years. This is the original budget for the project. We had estimated $32.5 million for design and build, 4.1 for soft costs associated with the project, and then a total project cost of $36.6 million. If you recall, that budget is actually broken up into 2 pots of money, $30 million for the overall project and $6.6 million in restricted TIF funding. And this is how it shook out. There is a detailed table of these expenditures in your packet, but the design build came in at about $33.5 million. We spent $3 million in soft costs, and so that put us at $36.5 million. We're about $80,000 under budget. And then I provided a breakdown below about how much we spent out of TIF. We came right up to the edge on that. We have about $6,300 remaining in that pot of money. And like I mentioned, about $80,000 or $79,000 remaining in overall project budget. So I would be happy to answer any questions that you have about this budget or any of these actual figures.
Anybody have any questions?
Yes.
It looks like Brian does.
Okay, Brian?
Yes, Councilmember Nath. So the report we have in our packet, so we started spending money on this in 2017. So what we spent in 17, 18, and 19, those amounts have already been audited through our annual audit, correct?
That's correct.
And so when we get through with the 20 audit and we get a clean opinion, then we can have full assurance that this report is correct, validated by a third party, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Neal, I have my hand raised.
Mr. Knapp, go ahead.
I don't have the document in front of me just at the moment, but there was a difference between the design build costs, original and final of, I'm not sure how much, but could you explain or kind of give me some guidance on where those changes were, or how we ended up with the difference there? The soft costs were less, the design build costs were more than anticipated.
Sure. So the difference is we ended up using almost the entire $1 million. We had an owner contingency for the design build portion of the project, the actual construction of the building. And what happened is when we initially went out to bid, we had some things at a pretty basic level because we wanted to make sure that we came in under budget. And so when we realized we had the opportunity to expand some areas of the building, such as the courtyard, we pushed out the lobby a little bit to create more space there. We made some enhancements in the aquatic area. And then we also had some COVID impact that we needed to absorb. As you recall, the tile for the pool was delayed because of COVID. And that delay created some additional design build costs for us. So all those things combined are what increased the money that we spent constructing the building. So they were all added features to the facility.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Hans?
Considering some of the issues that I've read about recently with the lack of a moisture barrier, and then that we know that the art project is not fully complete, I just want to, is that reflected in this not yet posted? Hopefully we haven't paid for all of the art project yet.
Yeah, so the moisture barrier issue is a warranty item, and so we don't owe any additional money on it. And with the art, the issue we're having with the art is actually not with the pieces of art. Those are fine. It's with the connection to our lighting system, which is our responsibility, not the artist's responsibility. So the money, all of the fees to get those up and running have been included in this final budget. So they're reflected. The $8,000 not yet posted is to fix the electrical issues on our end.
Oh, but it's on our end. It is not being held against them. Oh, okay.
Mr. Silvers?
I just wanted to comment that the art looked wonderful in Chief's Red last night.
Yes, it did. It will be exciting when both pieces are lit up.
Any other questions of Meredith?
Is there any way we can keep Meredith on board here until we're absolutely perfect on every single line?
I will be charging a consultant fee for that. And I'll just go ahead and take that $80,000.
I was going to say that messes up the budget.
Right.
I can guarantee you we'll keep her till the next meeting. How's that?
Yeah, I'll be here till the next meeting.
I do want to know, are we going to get like a video montage, Kavai, of your greatest moments over the last year?
Yeah, normally I'm behind the video, so there's not too many of me out there.
Just pick the best one, the ones where you look the best.
We'll see. We'll put Jenna in charge of that. I'm sure she has.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that update. Next item is the mill presentation. Chris, would you fill us in on this?
I will. Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully I can do that here. Can everybody see mill presentation up there?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
Thank you. This is a presentation that is really an outgrowth of our 2021 budget discussions. I felt like we talked a little bit about the mill during the budget, but since we had a compressed budget cycle, we had new council members that we really, because of COVID, because of our remote meetings, I felt like we really didn't get to have a good informative conversation about the mill. And when you're in kind of the heat of the budget discussions, sometimes that adds an unnecessary bit of pressure or gravity to having a mill conversation. So as we gear up for the 2022 budget cycle, we will be sending out goals and objectives here shortly. I wanted to just have a mill presentation, something that is purely informational. From that standpoint, and so we don't have to feel like it's overly urgent. It was really just to share information. It doesn't have to be a discussion, although my last slide says questions, and I'm happy to answer any of them. But I did want to just give a mill presentation. My first disclaimer is I do not believe at this time, and I'm pretty doggone certain that staff will not be recommending either a mill increase or a mill decrease as part of our 2022 budget. So this is not anything that staff is paving the way to soften up the council for. This is just purely educational in nature. So again, that's not to say we will or we won't. It's just I wanted to take a little bit of time just to share about 8 slides with the council relative to our mill. So first one is, what is a mill and how is it calculated? So a mill is equal to $1 of tax for each $1,000 of assessment. So the average market value of a home in Merriam is $205,589. That's a great number. It's been coming up over the last 10 years. It's fantastic if you're a homeowner. If you're trying to get into a first-time home, that's probably not as fantastic, but it is an asset that is accruing value if you have one in Merriam. The assessment rate is the state determined rate that property tax will be assessed at. So this is not a number we pick. This is a number that comes down via state statute. And the assessment rate for residential property is 11.5%. For commercial, it's 25%. Then there's different, for vacant land, for ag property, but for all intents and purposes in Merriam, it's residential is 11.5% and commercial is 25%. You'll see the effect of that here on a slide here in a few minutes. So basically what happens is we take that to figure out the assessed valuation. We take that 205,589, we multiply it by the residential assessment rate of 11.5%, and that gives us 23,643. That is your assessed valuation. You will see that number on your tax statement that comes from the county from time to time, and that's how they arrived at that number. That number is then multiplied against the mill. So the mill rate in Merriam, which the city has held steady for more than a decade, is 20. There's been slight variations, but the city council hasn't voted for over a decade to increase the mill rate. Is 27.558. So the way the annual tax is figured is that 23,643 times the mill of 27.558 divided by 1,000. And so if you live in an average value home in Merriam, your annual taxes, property taxes, are $651.55 or $54.30 per month. So that's for all of the services that we provide in Merriam. That's what your average property tax bill would be. We'll expand on that a little bit on the next slide. So on the next slide, this is the value of the 2021 residential mill levy to a property owner. So you can see over there on the left column, you've got the market value of homes, 150, the average 205,589, a $250,000 house, 300, and a $400,000 house. At 27.558 mills, you can see again there in our average home is $651.55. That's your annual city tax mill levy. Monthly cost is $54.30 for the average. If you're a $250,000 house, you're paying $66 a month. So really, you're looking at a cell phone bill, maybe a cable bill. That's maybe even a little bit more than that. The cable bill would be a little bit more than that. But that's your monthly cost of city services and as a residential property owner in our community. So then I think it's important that we talk about how much revenue actually comes from property tax. So how much city revenue is generated from our property tax? At 27.558 mills, we generate about $4.8 million. That $4.8 million equates to about 18% of citywide revenues, which means every dollar of revenue that we generate for world-class parks, world-class police, world-class, all of the great fantastic things that we do, great government, good, all the good things that we do. Property tax accounts for 18 cents of every dollar that we generate. So I think let's see how that compares. I think that's always important. We want to know how we stack up against our neighbors. So 18% of property tax in Merriam versus what our neighbors do. You can see on the left column, you've got some of our neighboring cities: Shawnee, Prairie Village, Roland Park, Overland Park, Mission, Olathe, and Merriam. Next column, you can see property tax. So this is property tax as a percentage of all revenues in each of those communities. So you can see Shawnee, 38.5, so 39 cents of every dollar of revenue they generate comes from property tax. I will point out that many of these cities have stormwater utility funds. I included that in there also, a stormwater utility fund. We do not charge, we just pay for that out of our CIP. Other cities create a fee out of that, so I've rolled that into several of these cities, but that has the same effect of a property tax to an owner of residential property. But you can see 38.5, 33.5 in Roland Park. Mission are probably closest in terms of size neighbor on this list, 26.3%. And you can see Merriam down there, property tax is 18.2%. Clearly the lowest. How do we do that? I created that next column just to explain, and that's 52% of our revenue comes from sales tax, which is fantastic. The majority of our revenue coming from commercial activity in our community, but it is volatile. That is why we keep those large balances. When we look at those large balances and we say, why are we sitting on so much money? We should look at 2007, 2008, and 2020 and say, that is why we sit on those. The reason that we can hold property tax where it has been held is because we rely on sales tax and maintain big balances. You can see the closest one in terms of sales tax over there is going to be Overland Park at almost 40%. But that's 10, 12, 13% less in terms of a percentage of overall revenue than the city of Merriam does, which I think is fantastic that we're able to do that. So, I mean, I know that the property tax is the most hated tax of all taxes, but in terms of what it weighs on our commercial and our residential properties, it's relatively small. Next, we're going to talk about who pays property taxes. I think it's important when we talk about that 18% of property tax, where does property tax come from? So of that 18% of all revenue that comes from the property tax, 55% of that is commercial. Our commercial properties pay 55% of all property tax. There's an other category that's 3%, that's vacant properties. Personal property rolls into that. But when we talk about residential property tax, if we want to use the word burden, property tax burden, 42% of that 18% is what our residential properties pay in property tax. And when we, if we were to call that out back on our chart, you can see down there at the bottom now how much revenue comes from residential property tax, not all property tax, but residential property tax. It's about $2 million or 8% of citywide revenues. So residential property tax burden is 8 cents of every dollar comes from residential property tax. And we'll illustrate a little bit more on I think it's the next slide, the difference between commercial and what commercial pay because of their assessment rate that I mentioned earlier, 25% versus residential assessment at 11.5%. But I think it's important that we recognize the difference between 18% is property tax, but really only 8% of all of our revenue comes from residential property tax. So let's talk for a second about the value of a mill. So 1 mill in city revenue is $174,651. So if we were to increase the mill rate from 27.558 to 28.558, we would have an additional $174,000, almost $175,000. If we were to decrease the mill by 1 mill, we would have less at about $175,000 less. So just to break it out so we can kind of put in context what really a mill looks like to a residential property value or a residential property owner versus a commercial property owner. We've seen this first chart to the left, at least the first two columns, the market value of a home. We know what the annual mills when it's 27.558. The new column is actually what the value of 1 mill is. So to an average family home of $205,000, 1 mill equals less than $2 a month. So I point that out only simply to say that when we talk about let's lower or increase the mill by 1 mill, we recognize that that's really, we're talking about $2 to an annual homeowner. It's $2 a month. Then the next column is the value of commercial property tax. So I've got a couple different categories in there. So we've got a $275,000 property. Think Merriam Drive. Businesses on Merriam Drive, that would be about the value of their business. 400,000, I'm going to skip over that and come back to that. $1.5 million, that would think a new fast food restaurant would have a value of $1.5 million. $5 million would be the market value of, say, a big vacant retailer that exists in our community, or $11.5 million would be one of our newer car dealerships. A new car dealership, when they come online, they're in the ballpark of $11.5 million. Some of them creep a little bit higher than that. And just for reference sake, you'd multiply that bottom number by about 3.5, almost 4, if you wanted to know the value of a large Scandinavian retailer that's right down the street from City Hall. The $400,000 on each of those is simply just to illustrate the difference that assessment rate of 11.5 versus 25% has on commercial property versus residential property. So if you have a $400,000 house in Merriam, and they do exist, we have quite a few of them. The value of 1 mill, your annual property tax bill is going to be $1,267.67 that goes to the city of Merriam. 1 mill has a value of $46. So to increase or decrease the mill to a $400,000 residential property owner, it's about $46 for 1 mill. But a $400,000 commercial property tax, meaning that if I sold that business, I would get the same amount of money, but because it assesses as commercial property, they pay over double. So their annual tax levy is $2,755. 1 mill is $100. So you can see the difference there is I mean, it doubles. So when we talk about residential property tax relief, when we talk about lowering the mill, and again, I'm just going to say lowering, but we could be talking about increasing the mill. But when we talk about lowering the mill, to lower the mill by 1, essentially the city does without $175,000. We put on an average home, we put $2 back into those folks' pocket per month, which is fantastic. But when you keep in mind that in property tax, we're one of about 8 different property taxing entities, that $2 likely gets absorbed in somebody else's increase or just the minor variations that occur in assessed valuation across all those taxing entities. So when we talk about we want to actually help our homeowners, I think this is just to illustrate that a 1 mill increase probably is not the level of help that we're all thinking of when we talk about decreasing the mill or increasing the mill. So last thing I want to illustrate simply is the cumulative effect that the mill has. If we increase the mill, it clearly has a cumulative effect each year. If we decrease the mill, it has a cumulative effect, very similar to a program. If you do a mill decrease, you are essentially going to pay for that every year because that money does not exist. We don't simply just look and say, hey, I have this amount of money sitting around and we'd like to give it back to the residents. We will continue to give it back every year. It has a value. And so for illustrative purposes, this is the cumulative effect of plus or minus 1 mill. So on the left column, you've got year, but it very well could just say year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So the assessed valuation there, that is the current year assessed valuation. And then we assume 1% annual AV growth. I will tell you that that's a very, very conservative number. I'm pretty sure when you look at your tax bill, you recognize that it goes up more than about 1% per year, but we had to come up with some number. So if we assume that assessed valuation is going to go up 1% a year, you can see the annual impact. So the annual impact this year is 1,000th of the 174 million. So the annual impact's 174,651. Next year it would be 176,397. But it's that last column where you see the cumulative impact of that. So if you did a mill increase next year in 2022, we'd have an additional $175,000. I'm going to round it just for ease. But the cumulative effect is that by that second year, that mill actually has a value of about $350,000. By the third year, you'd have $530,000 and so on and so forth. The thing to keep in mind is that, this is a great way to incrementally increase taxes. If you see something that's coming down the horizon and we don't want to raise the property mill by 4 mills in 1 year, you raise it 1 mill, X amount of years beforehand, or you raise it 1 mill and then you raise it another mill the next year, and you can have an incremental growth to your revenue, so you don't have to borrow money for something that's coming down the pipeline. But the flip side of that is in terms of lowering the mill, if you decrease the mill by 1 mill, this is the amount of money that you've given back to the residents, which don't mean to say that that's not a good thing. But I will tell you that if you look at that bottom column, you've by the end of that, your 1 mill increase, we've pretty much, that's couple streets. We spent that much money in the last 2 years in fire trucks. I'd have to ask Councilmember Pape how often we replace fire trucks, but I'm going to guess it's probably about every 15 years. So that's the value of 2 fire trucks that 1 mill has. But again, this is just for illustrative purposes so that we understand that the cumulative effect of a mill is not just what happens in year 1, it's what it does in year 2, year 3, year 4. And that's not to say that you can't increase the mill for a couple of years and then decrease it, or vice versa, decrease it for a couple of years or increase it. But generally, when, in my experience, and this is just my experience, once the mill is changed, it pretty much is locked in, because there's so much it's not an easy process. So that once you change the mill and vote to change the mill pretty much gets locked in until something requires that it need to be changed. So, and then just one last quick slide, just simply to say that it's not just the property tax mill. There are other funding sources tied to the mill levy. So motor vehicle tax and the countywide sales tax distribution, both of those formulas are based upon the levy. They are nowhere as large of a number as just the plain property tax that comes to the city. But when we play with our mill levy, it does change those formulas and those disbursement formulas. So it will have a negative impact or a positive impact as we change the mill. And then clearly TIF revenue. TIF revenue is based on property taxes. If we lower the property tax or we increase the property tax, that lowers or increases the amount of money that's available within our TIF account for economic development, or to pay off development deals that are existing, such as one with IKEA or the ones that are with DDR for Merriam Point. So I know I rushed through this, and I'm happy to share this with the council, but I'm open for any questions that anybody might have. Let's see.
It's Councilmember Neal's hand raised.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I have a couple questions and then some comments, but you mentioned some numbers, the difference between the commercial property tax revenues and the residential property tax revenues. We also have essentially my understanding, of course, is that we have TIF districts where we have restricted use of the funds collected from property taxes. And then we also have the general property tax, which involves the areas outside of the TIF district. What is the breakdown of commercial versus residential in the non-TIF areas and in the TIF areas?
The TIF revenue is actually pulled out of that. TIF revenue is 3% of all revenue. So that property tax is independent of TIF revenue. So
So the number that you gave me didn't have TIF in it when you said commercial properties. They weren't an overall property tax for the city. They were just the non-TIF portion.
correct. When we call out our all revenue fund, we actually have a line item that's in there that is TIF revenue, and so TIF revenue is 3%.
Okay. Right. So, but in that commercial number, there is none of the commercial properties within the TIF district. Is that correct?
That is my understanding. I'm going to see if Donna's on here to interrupt me in case I'm quoting something wrong, but I believe that because I don't think there's any residential in the TIF. The TIF is all commercial. So the 3% is the 3% that's pulled out would be nothing but the commercial properties that are located in the I-35 TIF district. Donna, if you're on here, is that correct?
That is correct. That is correct.
Okay, so basically, the numbers you gave were for the commercial property tax revenues outside of the TIF district in your slide.
Correct. Yes, sir.
All right, that's perfect. I was just wanting to make sure that I understood that. Yeah, the other point or thought that I think is important to understand, people get their property tax bills and find out, they got to adjust their escrow account, things like that on their mortgage payments each year, because property tax itself is a multiplication of 3 different factors. The assessment rate set by the state, nothing can be done about that. But the mill rate, which is the tax rate, and the valuation. So if the mill rate stays the same, but the valuation continues to increase, effectively the tax increases. And I think so that there's a lot of confusion among the public because they see their tax increase as their valuations increase, but then we say, well, we haven't changed the mill rate in 2 decades. And I think that there's some confusion about that, and I think it's important to clarify that. But beyond that, on the question part, over the last number of years, at least the last, I know 2 years ago, the valuations for commercial properties went up much less than the valuations for residential properties. And I think that's sort of a pattern that we've been in. What is the most recent breakdown of the increase in valuation for residential versus the increase in valuation for commercial properties? Do you have that information?
We don't. We meet with the appraiser, I think next week or sometime this month. We have it on our calendar to meet with the appraiser. I don't remember exactly what the date is, but I think it's coming up here in the next week or two, and we will have all that information. Yeah, February. So they usually roll all that out in preparation so people can start to put their budget together.
Is that something that, when it's available, that you could provide me with the breakdown
absolutely.
And the increase between the residential side and the commercial side? I think, one of the other pieces of this is that, yes, Merriam's property tax piece of a Merriam resident's property tax bill is a very small portion of it, but their valuation increases are applied to all the different mill rates. So the net effect of the valuation changes is significant. My understanding was that some other jurisdictions that Merriam residents pay into actually reduced their mill rate last year in order to essentially keep the increase in tax less due to the economic conditions in the pandemic, because knowing that the valuations had increased. So in a sense, lowering the mill rate is to some extent an offset, can be an offset for increases in valuation. And that's something that also needs to, I think, be understood in the in understanding of property taxation. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out, but I do want to know what the latest valuation changes are by category, if possible, as soon as we can.
Yeah,
Thank you.
we can share the valuation data. I would share just two quick points. First point is that the mill rate that's established by the council, well, it is flexible that the council could move it. I guess philosophically, my own personal philosophy is that when the cost of a gallon of milk goes up, the expectation is not that we decrease the sales tax rate. The cost of milk is just what the cost of milk is. The value of a property is what the value of the property is. So I mean, and that's not a critique at anything that you said. I just think that that's just a general comment. I mean, we don't. When you set the mill, you set the mill. If one of the multipliers goes up, unlike the cost of milk, the value of your home goes up. I mean, I think that's actually good news. I mean, that means that we are collectively, all of us, doing what we were elected to do, what we were hired to do. We've actually created a desirable place. So I think that's maybe something that we should make sure the public's more aware of. But from a legislative standpoint, I will tell you that there is a piece of legislation, Senate Bill 13, that is called the Truth in Taxation Bill, that addresses that exact point that you just made. And should it pass, which it very likely will, it would require a vote of the council and a public hearing to say that any dollar over a revenue neutral rate by any taxing entity would require some sort of notice of the public. So what you just said, if our property valuations go up by 0.5%, 10%, 100%, if we're going to gather a penny more in property tax than we got the year before, we will have to say that we are increasing taxes. So that actually is going to be addressed likely in legislation that's coming down the road.
Yeah. Can I follow up? Yeah, I agree that's the case, and I certainly, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to put forward that clarification for people who are just kind of learning about property tax.
Sure, absolutely.
I think it isn't so many things being discussed. But I also wanted to comment on your comment regarding. Yes, property valuations going up are good for many of us if we are intending to sell our properties. But if we are planning to stay in our properties, yes, that's a paper increase in value, but a real annual cost. And so it's not a liquid asset unless you sell your house. And so I think that while it's good for property values to go up, and I think it's good that we do things that increase the desirability of our community and therefore increase the property value. I think it's also true that people who have lived here for a long time and are on fixed incomes, and they will experience a increase in the cash outlay in real time, that they will have to find other cash to pay for, and so therefore there's kind of a dynamic that needs to be understood fully when we make these kind of decisions one way or the other. And
agreed.
In addition, some of the other jurisdictions that have looked to lower their mill rates, I believe the county did. I don't know what the other cities did off the top of my head, but if any of the other cities did. But that's also a factor, because in adjusting the total tax that people experience. And so therefore, I just wanted to kind of put that side of the mechanism out there as well. Thanks.
Any other questions?
Christopher,
Sorry about
You-
that, Hans. Go ahead.
this is Chris Hans. You mentioned that the stormwater utility was included in your comparison chart. Do the other cities like Prairie Village, does their trash collection, does that also get tagged on to their property tax?
It does for them. I did not include that in my numbers because I viewed that as it's paying for a service independent of the property tax, so that it's not an apples to apples comparison with us because we don't have single hauler. So yeah,
Okay. That's what I wanted to know.
It really, when my first run through that list, the numbers just didn't make sense to me. I was trying to figure out, I'll pick on Mission for an example. You know, they have the transportation utility tax or whatever, the driveway tax. You know, I was looking at their property tax and it was so small, it just didn't make sense that they could support a budget that size. And as I started digging through it, I realized, oh, they've got stormwater, they've got other utilities. So, you know, and then I had to dig into what those were, and I go, well, that's essentially a property tax. I mean, it's, we can call it what we want to call it, but it's you know, it's essentially a tax on property owners. And so
yeah, I just wanted to be sure you consider trash as another equalizer.
I did, because, you know, Olathe provides their own trash. So, you know, the good thing is that because in Johnson County, you know, everybody is GFOA certified every year, and they put together good budgets. You can pretty much go through all of them and go through all the different funds, and you can kind of track what each one of them are, and you can say, okay, this is what this is, you know, and if you do what we do, you know, you kind of understand what those things are. So yeah, that was for illustrative purposes, but it does include some things other than pure property tax.
Any other questions? Jason.
I just wanted to say I appreciate you offering to send this out to us, and I'd love to receive a copy of that.
I will get that out.
I would like to receive one also. This is Dave Neal.
I'll get it to everybody. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. The fifth item on our agenda is a CIP update. So Jim, if you're still awake, we'll be happy to receive that from you.
Wonderful. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I have your February CIP update. I don't have a whole lot to update you on. We got a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes. Our 2021 street improvement program, which is our East Frontage Road, 67th to 75th Cars project, our 2021 Mill and Overlay project, and our 2021 sidewalk maintenance repair program. We have a bid opening scheduled for February 17th for those projects. It's all going to be one bid and one contractor. Staff held a pre-bid meeting with the Finnis Engineering last Friday, and we had several prospective contractors interested, and they all asked some good questions. So we're excited to get their bids. And then once council approves once we select a contractor and council approves a contract, we'll schedule a public meeting for the end of March to have all the residents that are impacted by these programs. And that's all I have for the CIP update. I'm here to answer any questions for CIP or public works related items.
Whitney, you have a question?
No questions. Just want to say the snow plows just came by my house, and as always, love you guys. Thank you for all of your hard work the last week and upcoming week, I'm sure. And that's my dog snoring, if you hear that noise. So Lefty has things for the record as well. But thank you guys. I know it's difficult.
We appreciate it. Thank you.
Especially in this temperature. It makes it even more difficult.
Yeah, we're finding the chemicals that don't work very well in single digits. So we're having to do some extra treatments and some plowing, and just hope everybody's patient with us as we go through these next several days.
Well, thanks for the update.
Thank you.
Stay safe. Staff items. Chris, do we have anything for staff?
I'm going to turn it over to Meredith, let her share a staff announcement.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. I think council members already know this, but my last day with the city will be February 23rd. I am moving to Detroit and starting a whole new adventure. It just happens to be my 4-year anniversary with the city that exact day. So it is kind of a weird full circle moment, but the last 4 years have certainly been an adventure and a good time. And I'm so happy that the community center project is coming to completion. City Council actually approved moving forward on that project at my very first council meeting where my employment was approved. So yeah, it's just a lot of weird kind of full circle moments, but I've really enjoyed working for the city of Merriam and working with all of you. And leaving is certainly bittersweet. So I hope I have the opportunity to see and chat with all of you before I leave. But if not, thank you. It has certainly been an honor. And I'll be at the next meeting. Don't worry, you're not done with me yet.
Well, thank you for the time that you spent with us. It's been valuable to us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've always
Appreciate
wanted
this.
one of those.
We will definitely have a little recognition of her. I just didn't want the public that may not know to see all of a sudden at the last meeting she's disappearing off of the off of our Hollywood squares here and not know what happened. So
Or that I just offered to be paid $80,000.
right, yeah, exactly what that
for you
meant.
all.
Yeah, like is that how we do business, Merriam?
Got it. Yeah, got it. No, I'm leaving.
So yeah, thank you. Other than that, I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has about staff. I don't have anything else at this time.
We have no new business, I presume.
No, sir.
All right, well, I think it's time. If somebody would like to make a motion to adjourn, I would accept it. Bob?
I'll try that again. Mayor, I make a motion to adjourn.
And
I'll
Chris,
second.
motion's made and seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Aye.
Bye.